Welcome to another episode of Career Tea. I'm your host, Saurabh Memar, and we're interviewing Nate DeFranco today. Nate has a bachelor's degree in accounting and an MBA degree in finance. So we'll be learning about his professional experiences in the accounting world, as well as the corporate banking world, and the different roles he has pivoted through. Nate is also a fellow podcaster, so we'll be diving into that and learning about his recent ventures. The man, the myth, the legend, Nate DeFranco,
Yes,
Bills
sir.
Mafia. Welcome to Career Tea.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
So while we're on the Career Tea and podcasting topic, I want to learn a little bit about your podcast that you've recently launched. So tell us about the name and how you became about the podcast and why you started it.
Yeah, so my podcast I started is probably about a month ago now. It's called the Bills Tailgate Happy Hour. I kind of came up with it because I mean, every time I'd watch a Bills game, I would, want to listen to content after the game, hear, what the experts are saying on, who looked good, who didn't look good, just like expert analysis. And honestly, I didn't love any of the Bills podcasts that I was listening to. Like, I thought they were all okay. They weren't like overly exciting. That kept me coming back every week. So honestly, I just wanted it. I started my own just to kind of engage people like, yourself, my friends, my family, just to share my thoughts on the game. And then obviously, get their thoughts and share what kind of the rest of the fan base is thinking. So it's been fun. To this point, it's been mostly just, people that I know, friends, family that have been listening. But so far, that's kind of what I was trying to accomplish in the first place, was just have an avenue for me to interact with my friends and family.
I know the Bills Mafia is a huge organization,
Oh, yeah.
a lot of supporters. So
Yep.
Hopefully it will grow more than just friends and family.
Yeah.
And turns into a community. Having started my podcast and hosting a podcast, sounds like a lot of fun. It sounded a lot of fun before I started it, and it is a lot of fun,
Mhm.
but it's also a lot of work. So I want to hear about, you've started recently, correct?
Yep, about a month ago.
So I want to hear about what's your experience been so far regarding like the work that goes into it, the prep, the work.
Yeah. So that's funny. I will say, so I've done, I think 5 episodes to this point, and knock on wood, luckily each episode has gotten a little bit easier from like the actual work perspective. But to your point, it's really hard because obviously, especially when you think of like the football schedule, like the games are usually on Sunday, or like in some cases Monday night if they're playing a primetime game. People want to hear this content like pretty quickly after the game, right? So like it kind of gives me like, at least in my eyes, like a 2-day window to kind of record these episodes. And I mean, for me, it's tough, obviously, because now that I have a kid at home and a wife and everything, like it's really hard to fit it in, like especially in that small window. So for the most part, I've been able to do it like the following day, and the actual recording of it, like the video and the audio, has not been too time consuming. It's really the extra work, like you're talking about, like the editing, make it, any sound effects you want to add to it. So, and the prep, actually, that I usually spend like an hour, hour or two during the day before recording, like, mapping out what I'm going to talk about. And it definitely takes some time, and I'm getting better at it, but it's definitely time consuming.
Good thing is like the theme of the podcast you're doing, like you are already watching Bills games. So good thing is you're already watching it. So it's kind of like a fun thing you're adding on to it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing about, the podcast, which you might have already covered, but where do you also see it going?
Yeah. So I think, again, my favorite part is just reading the messages I get every week. So if you ever listen to my podcast, I basically do a segment every episode where I just read off all of the messages I received. And then I've even been pulling like reactions off Twitter from more like well-known Bills names. And that's been super fun because, again, I just get to interact with people directly. And usually after the episodes, like the people who I, read their thing on air, they'll reach out to me and give me more, just kind of respond to it. Nice. So I get kind of like this, ongoing, text thread with my friends and some of these people. And I guess where I see it going is, I think I shared this with you earlier, is I really want to try to actually bring like a live guest on the show. So, to this point, I've just been doing this totally solo. I just kind of go on and talk on my podcast, but I would like to get either, a well-known Bills media person on the show, or just, honestly, anyone in general. And another idea I had was, like, for example, the Bills are playing the Jets this week. I had the idea of, I have a good friend who's a big Jets fan. I was like, oh, maybe I should get him on the show and we could just kind of have like a little banter session before the game. So nothing I've totally gone down the road of yet, but things I'm certainly thinking about as I go forward.
Do you think you're, all the research you're doing about the games, the players, do you think you're also like learning a lot more than you previously knew?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing you realize is like, so obviously with football, like everyone knows the wide receivers, right? Everyone knows the quarterbacks. Everyone knows the skill position players, but that's the one thing that you don't get for just like kind of a, I don't want to say an amateur football fan, but like unless you're really like doing the research, you're reading the stats, you're watching the game, you're not going to notice a lot of these like, defensive linemen or even some of these like linebackers that you wouldn't normally know to look for. Yeah. So that's definitely one thing. And then the second thing is like, even just watching the game, like same exact thing. Like you always remember the plays made by Josh Allen, right? Yeah. But you never are going to remember the big pass breakup that Jamarcus Ingram had, right? And again, most people probably don't even know who that is, right? So it changes the way you watch the game. And then also like, it just makes you, really appreciate some of these other critical parts of football that most fans don't realize.
That's true. And I wouldn't say I'm like a super hardcore like football fan. So it's fun to like listen to your podcast because it's an easy way to like learn a thing or two about, the Bills games. As well as just football overall, because I'm not going to go do my own research or pay attention like every week.
And I will say just one thing actually, because one thing I've been trying to do is it is a Bills podcast technically, but I try to also have a session on just the NFL in general, like what's going on. And specifically now that I live in Cleveland, I have a lot of Cleveland Browns fans that listen. So I do kind of a weekly thing on the Browns too. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a Bills focused podcast, but I try to get as many listeners across just any football fan in general. So,
nice. Yeah. I do have a few more questions about your podcast, but we're going to save those for the end.
Lovely.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit towards your professional career and education. And then we'll come back again to podcast questions.
Okay. Lovely.
But tell me a little bit about your undergrad education, what you studied, and where did you go to school?
Yep. So I went to Rochester Institute of Technology up in Rochester, New York. So funny enough, my dad, he spent 30 years kind of in the sales world. So, I kind of always had this thing of, I want to be, in business of some sort. So I actually was pretty undecided going into my senior year of high school, what exactly I wanted to study. And then I remember I took this accounting I took like a high school accounting class my senior year, and first test of the year, I got a perfect score on it. And like back then I was pretty, I don't know if simple minded is the right word, but I was like, oh, sweet. Like apparently I'm good at accounting. Like maybe I should do this. So that's where like, I kind of was like, all right, I'm going to do accounting. And I knew I wanted to stay local. I grew up obviously in the Rochester area. So I knew I wanted to stay local, and both my parents went to RIT, so it was just kind of a natural, segue for me to go to school there. And then, I mean, once I got there, I ended up, accounting is what I finished my degree in, but I kind of switched around on kind of the minor and some of these other courses I took, but that's kind of how I landed on accounting, and it ended up being a good choice for me for sure.
Yeah, that's a great field, and I think it's a type of field where there's always need for it, like every company.
Oh yes, yep.
Did your parents also study like accounting? Because you said they also went to RIT.
So my dad, he was in the business school at RIT way back in the day. I don't think he was accounting. I think he was business management. My mom was in the tourism and hospitality industry. So she was, for the most part of my childhood, she was a stay-at-home mom. But before she had kids, she did a lot in that industry. And that was obviously I'd say a much bigger industry back before, the internet and social media. But yeah, that's two business type fields that my parents were in. So,
nice.
Yep.
So for people like students that are like wondering if they should go towards accounting field, you said you took an exam and you were like, you're good at it, so maybe I want to go towards that. A lot of people have the assumption that accounting is a lot of numbers, math, calculating, what's your take on that? What would you kind of give an explanation of what your undergrad was like learning accounting?
Yeah. So I actually learned, so I think you shared in the beginning, I did my MBA focused in finance. So I kind of got both those realms of accounting and finance. And to your point, like accounting was pretty math heavy. You're dealing with numbers all day. I actually found finance to be more math intensive than at least the accounting curriculum. And that's mainly because like when I was taking these master's level finance classes, like it was a lot of, calculating, future value of certain things, or calculating, what's the break even on this or that. Right. And they're both in general, there's definitely parallels between accounting and finance, but I actually found finance to be more math heavy than accounting. But and you might be asking about this later, but I do think once you get out into the professional world of accounting, you realize it's much more than that. And you don't really, most accountants don't sit with, calculators, and they're not hand punching in math problems all day. Like that's really just like, we have computers that do all that stuff now. So it's more about the insights you gather from the work you're doing rather than actual just like pure math. Right. So
where you say, in the real world, you guys have computers and softwares that kind of do all those calculations for you guys. Do you think that colleges should almost focus a bit more on students like learning these softwares and how to use those? Because in the real world, like you said, there's computers and softwares that will calculate so much of the accounting work for you. I also studied accounting undergrad, and we didn't touch on any of that. Like everything was manual. And I have friends now that are in the accounting field, and they say the software and the computer does it all. So what do you think? Do you think like school should focus a little bit less? It's good to like learn how things work, but do you think they should also focus on how to use these softwares and computers?
So yes, that is an excellent question, because I have this conversation with like leadership within my own organization now. Is like, I think when I went to RIT in undergrad, we had like an introduction to Excel. It wasn't called that, but that's essentially what it was. It was like an intro to Excel course my freshman year. But outside of that, like there was no real like, software type training or, and again, Excel is a very basic software. It's just, you can obviously do formulas and stuff like that, but it's not like, more advanced like some of the other softwares that are out there nowadays. So I always said that because my first role out of college, especially when I moved into the banking world, like I didn't even realize how much you can do with stuff like Excel. But I also say that with a grain of salt, because so one thing I do currently in my current role is I interview a lot of like interns and, potential analysts, which is like our entry level type role at the bank. I interview a lot of candidates for that. And one thing I have noticed, and I caution kind of college students about, is sometimes they get over intensive on those platforms you're talking about. So like pretty much every resume I get now has like, 6 different softwares or coding languages that everybody knows. And that's all great. Like those are all tools you can, students can use, and it shows you're obviously smart if you can understand this stuff. But I also want to make sure that colleges also remind students to learn the soft skills, because, and again, I can certainly go into this more later, but like when you're an entry level or an intern or an analyst at wherever you go, like, yeah, this is all good stuff, but like most people want just people that are, can communicate extremely well. If you need help, you're able to ask for help. And that's just like what people remember. Like, again, I've seen so many people come through the bank, and they knew 6 different coding languages, whatever, great for them. But like, if you don't make those connections internally and like use those soft skills and business skills, like it's only so far you can go. Again, especially depending on your career path. But I definitely caution, it's a good mix. You got to definitely teach those things you're talking about, but also make sure you don't lose focus on the business skills.
Yeah, I agree. And that's an important point you bring up. I saw a post earlier on LinkedIn of the CEO who said the 3 things that they focus on mostly when hiring is like attitude, personality, and reliability, because every other skill can be taught. But those things like that can't be taught. And that's what essentially drives or makes a good employee. So looking at your undergrad, while you were doing accounting, did you do any internships as well? And if so, how did you land those internships?
So it's good you asked that question, because funny enough, I would probably say a little bit of a non-traditional path in my college days and my first role. So I did do an internship. I think it was it was in the middle of my junior year, actually. I did the whole public accounting thing. So I interned for a local firm up in Rochester, specifically in tax. So again, for anyone who's out in the accounting world, that's like one of the most historical, I don't say historical, but like that's just like one of those main roles that they always talk about in the accounting programs is either like tax or audit. So I did that whole internship. I never went to, so RIT, as you know, coming from there, like they have that big career fair that the whole campus goes to. I actually, and I don't recommend this, I actually never went to that. Our school, our business school had one specifically for accounting. So that's where I met that employer was through the accounting career fair, which was super nice. I don't know if other schools do that as well, like more specific career fairs. But I think that was super helpful for me. And then once I got that first job, that's actually my first role when I graduated from school was with that same company I interned for. So I never really had to, and this is actually, I'm not recommending this. I'm actually saying this is one thing I somewhat regret is I didn't really talk to too many companies during school because I interned with that tax firm. I liked it. And I was like, oh, great. They're going to offer me a job. Like I'm taking it. Yeah. So, I definitely didn't shop around as much as I would say the traditional college student does when they first graduate. Yeah. Do
you remember what they were called?
The company?
Yeah.
The Bonadio Group.
The Bonadio Group in Rochester. Okay.
Yep.
So you started your first full-time experience at the Bonadio Group, and you said it was in the tax group. How would you describe your first year full-time work as a tax employee at the Bonadio Group?
Yeah, so it's pretty much how they lay it out in like what you see in the movies and stuff. Like, my first busy season, which, for all you tax people out there, January to April is like the time frame when everyone does their taxes. So I mean, I think I started like right in the midst of that. So, during, busy season, it's pretty intense. Like it's, I think we used to work like 6 days a week, like Monday through Saturday. And it was really just, full efforts for those time periods. I was mostly I did a little bit of individual income tax returns, but I mostly did like corporations, like LLC tax returns, S Corp, C Corps, all stuff like that. And then usually the individual returns we would do would be like, for the business owners of those businesses. So it was definitely the first year was mostly just really learning those softwares, like I was telling you about, starting to like understand, the broader picture of these businesses rather than just, doing the tax return, like actually punching in the numbers. So, it's definitely intense for busy season, but then usually the rest of the year it was
no work.
It was not no work, but it was definitely a lot more relaxed. Like we have summer Fridays, so like we only worked half days on Fridays in the summer, and there's not really any major deadlines from a tax perspective over the summer, so it's definitely a lot more relaxed, and it was nice.
Did you cook any books?
Not that I'm aware of to this point.
No, I'm just kidding.
You never know though.
So you were there for about a year at the Bonadio Group, and then that's where you made your first career switch, and you decided to go to corporate banking to KeyBank. Tell me a little bit about what opted that move, and how were you able to go from, a small accounting firm in Rochester to be able to go to a big company like KeyBank?
Yeah, so I'll admit, it was a pretty like quick timeline where I made that decision. So, and this is I actually really enjoyed that first role with the Bonadio Group. It's an amazing company. I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in accounting. The one thing that was just missing for me with that role is it was a lot of like at the desk doing, tax returns, doing a lot of the work. And one thing I love interacting with people. I love talking to people. And obviously I got to talk to like my coworkers and stuff there, but like I never got to like interact directly with clients for the most part.
Yeah.
So I knew that's one thing. I was like, all right, I definitely want a role where I can be more client facing. And at the time I was actually doing my master's, my MBA part-time while I was doing that first role. And it just kind of hit me like at that time. So I was a single guy. I didn't have a family. I was still living with my parents actually at the time. So I definitely had the time and the resources. And I was just like, I really just want to get this MBA done.
Yeah.
So I actually ended up leaving the Bonadio Group, going to finish my last semester of school full time, just because, like I said, my original time frame was that MBA was going to take me probably 5 to 6 years, but I just wanted to get it done. So I went back, finished it. And then, yeah, that's where I met KeyBank, which is still my current employer. But yeah,
Like through your MBA program, that's where you met KeyBank.
So I met them, funny enough, I just met them on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I knew I wanted to also just get a change from Rochester. So a lot of my family's actually from Cleveland. So I knew like that was one destination in my, like, maybe I'll see what's available in Cleveland. And Key was obviously a big bank in Cleveland. So that's how I got connected with them. And yeah, I mean, it was worlds of different going to a big corporation like that. I'd say the biggest thing is like, you know, for anyone who does accounting out there, at least in the public accounting space, like they know that the whole thing of, they call it billable hours, right? It's basically every hour you're working on someone's tax return or whatever you're doing, you have to basically like say, okay, I worked for 2 hours on this client. I worked for 4 hours on this client. But like once I moved into the banking world, like it was like no one, like there was no tracking of hours. There was no like, you know, attributing certain work to specific, like it was just way more broad based. So
all probably like internal, right? Or a lot of internal work,
well,
not with clients necessarily.
Yeah, it's just a little bit easier. I don't want to say easier, but like when you're working in public accounting, like, yeah, usually the you know, the work you're doing is, they obviously bill it based on how many hours it took us. To prepare it. That's just not how generally banking works. Like we don't charge our clients per hour of work. Like it, you know, we make money a myriad of ways, but none of them are which, you know, it's just directly attributable to, you know, our work. So yeah, that was definitely a big change for me.
Yeah. When you talk about when you decided to go study, you know, go get your MBA in finance, was that decision based on the fact that you kind of wanted to pivot out of accounting world or accounting field at some point?
Yes. So at the time, actually, the reason why I did it was I originally wanted to go the whole CPA route with my undergrad degree in accounting. So again, for any of you who may have done accounting in your undergrad, you know, you have to, if you want to take your CPA exam, which is like the main accounting license, I guess is the right word. You have to have more than, at least in New York State where I was, you have to have more than just a bachelor's degree to basically get that CPA. I think it's like, I don't even know what it is now, but back when I was going through it, you need at least 150 credit hours. And I think a bachelor's degree is only like 120 credit hours. So you basically had to fill that, you know, 30 credit hour gap with either a master's in accounting, or you could just take kind of like just general courses just to get to that number. But that was actually the original reason why I enrolled in the program. And obviously like I did end up changing paths a little bit, and it has, you know, shown to be helpful in other ways, but that is funny enough, actually not why I originally went for my MBA, but that's kind of just where we landed. So
nice. I mean, it worked out so far. So
yep.
But now I guess before I go to my next question, having taken, you know, been in school for accounting, been in school in finance, do you have a preference of the two?
It's so hard because, and again, I have this conversation with, you know, interns and, you know, young people in at the bank as well, is school can only like teach you so much, and school can only like, you know, expose you to so much of like what your actual day-to-day life would be. So to me, like, I think I enjoyed the finance education side of it a little more, just because again, it was a lot of like, you know, doing DCF models, doing, you know, cash flow analysis. Like it was very like, it's kind of like that fun stuff that you know, either see in movies or read on the news about, you know, Wolf of Wall Street, stuff like that. Accounting is, I enjoyed that piece of it too. It was just, it was just, for some reason, I enjoyed just like the applicability of the finance side of it a little bit more than I did the accounting side, I would say.
Nice.
Yeah.
So at KeyBank, you've held 3 roles so far: banking analyst, payments associate, and now you're a payments advisor. I kind of want to go over those 3 roles, starting out with banking analyst. When you started at KeyBank as a banking analyst, what did that role involve, you know, a day-to-day as a, you know, first-year banking analyst? Yeah,
so, well, I guess first to make what I'm about to say make any sense, I'll just kind of explain what payments is. So all 3 of those roles are within our payments, or we call it our treasury management group at the bank. So just kind of like how, you know, you and I have deposit accounts at banks, right, where we keep our checking accounts or savings accounts. We obviously do that for big businesses as well. So when we think of payments, basically we hold the deposits for, you know, our clients, and our clients being, you know, large companies. We have a whole array of different clients we serve, but So it's mainly that, and then also payments type solutions. So just how, like, if you want to, our clients send tons of wires, they send tons of ACHs. We have a couple, like, we call it AP automation type softwares. But anyway, sorry to circle back to the question. I think it's helpful to have that context. But as an analyst, you're basically just supporting, at the time it was kind of one of three different pillars. So the sales team, which is the team I'm a part of now. So you could be a business development analyst. You could be a product analyst supporting like our various product managers, product roles, or you could be, I think the other one was like a risk management type support model. So I was doing, I did the business development track, obviously. So basically what I was doing is I was supporting the payments advisors, which is what I am now, who are out in front of clients every day, either going over the current relationship with the client or talking about new products. So basically I was creating a lot of, pitch decks for these sales people. I was running a lot of data analysis. One thing, and for those of you who don't know the banking world too well, most of our clients like touch multiple parts of the bank. So, most of, my clients in payments are not just payments only clients. Like they probably also, work with our capital markets people to do deals, or they also, have a loan with our bankers. Right. So the point being is like, there's a lot of like, internal coordination that needs to go on at the bank.
I see.
So that's also what, when I was an analyst, I was helping out a lot with like, making some revenue models on clients, help, my senior business development leader, like put together reports for, internal meetings about how the business is doing, where's our opportunity, where are we falling short, stuff like that. So it's it's definitely doing a lot, but I would say, that's at the base level. What I was doing is supporting both the payments advisors, which again, what I am now, and then also like the internal stakeholders.
So it kind of like allows you to kind of touch base on different fields to kind of get a feel what the different work is in different areas. And when you said business track, when that was a business track that you were on, is that, I guess, what people should expect? Like you were banking analyst and payments associate, now payment advisor. Is that kind of the typical progression, starting out as a business or a banking analyst in that track?
Yeah. So the way that my group structures it is definitely very unique. So yeah, typically, like I basically went through 3 roles that were kind of what they would envision you to go through. So basically I spent 2 years at the analyst level, 2 years at the associate level, and more or less at the associate level, you're kind of doing not all the same stuff you're doing at the analyst level, but similar stuff you're doing at the analyst level, but then also kind of making that leap into the like client facing part where you actually have to go, not only do you have to prepare everything you're about to do, but actually go present it to the client. So yeah, that's what I would say. And it's funny, they always use me as like, and when I say they, like, my group leadership, they always use me as like the perfect example, because that is what they want to do for like the future analysts, is have them move from, analyst, associate, PA. And it's like a great like learning trajectory. And again, it just varies by what you want to specialize in. So again, the product, I think I mentioned like product is another track you can go down. That progression looks a little bit differently, like, what you'd be, and I can't even speak to it very well because I obviously didn't do it, but yeah, I would say generally my track was what they would envision as like the ideal thing for entry level analysts.
And you mentioned that you were 2 years at your first role, then 2 years at the second one. And you said the biggest difference was probably like the responsibility level, where you had to talk to clients or present to clients what you were finding out. What would you say the bigger difference is now that you are a payments advisor, compared to when you were a payments associate?
Yeah. So when I was a payments associate, I was still, I guess you could call me like, I was still like the more junior member that was on every account. So I had a senior payments advisor that I would partner with who, obviously I would help prepare the materials, prepare for the meeting. But in general, the senior payments advisor would be the one who would be running the whole meeting, talking to the client. I would attend these meetings and I would chime in certain scenarios, but I think you're getting the point. Like I wasn't like the main guy at the meeting. Once you become a payments advisor, like I still do have a teammate that like I work fairly closely with, and sometimes we do meetings together, but basically once you make that step to payments advisor, like I became like the face for the client, right? So like if they have a problem or they want to talk about a new product, like they're calling me. They're not calling my senior, payments advisor that I used to be partnered with. So that's probably the main, at least that was probably the biggest step there, is like I became, the junior person on the account, and then I became like the main person on the account.
So now that you are a payments advisor, what would you say like the trajectory would be from here on out, right? Like what would be the roles after this?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I talk about that a lot with, again, some of the younger people. So where I'm at now is actually a really cool, I'd call it a really cool place in my career, because I finally reached a level where, like, if I just wanted to be a payments advisor for the next 20, 30 years, however long, like I basically have I don't have to go on to do anything else. Like we have people who, it's like, I'm young, I'm only 29 years old. I've only been at Key for like 6 years. I'm like one of the younger payments advisors in the entire like group. But we also have payments advisors who are, have been around the banking world for 20, 30 years, have been doing that same role. So the point is like, you can make good money in this type of role, obviously, depending on how good you are at it. So you don't, if it's something which to this point I've really enjoyed it. So, I don't have any visions to jump to a new role anytime soon. But if I ever did, probably the logical next step would be kind of like what my boss's role is. So he basically is, you could think of, we use the term like he's a business development leader. So he does, go with us on client visits sometimes. Like he does interact here and there with clients, but it's also adding on that kind of like internal management aspect of it. So again, for anyone who's worked in a sales organization, like knows that like there's a lot of reporting that goes around every month. So like they're looking at pipelines, they're looking at, deals that were closed last month. You're looking at, how many clients left the bank last month? There's so many different like reporting and, discussions that need to be had in sales organizations. So, that is kind of the logical next step. If I ever wanted to take it, would be, obviously still being in front of clients, but also like being like the manager of the sales team, basically.
Nice.
So,
so as we talked about accounting a bit earlier, if you had stayed in accounting, if you didn't go the banking world, what possible routes and career paths would you have considered in accounting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually haven't thought about it too much in the past, but I would say, especially when I was in public accounting, the thing they would always tell you is, you could, work as a tax preparer for a couple of years, move up through the ranks, and then, eventually you'll start building rapport with some of your clients, and you could go, be their CFO, or you could go be their controller, right? Yeah. Which actually is very similar to how I view my role now in the banking world. Is like, again, I really don't have any plans to move on from KeyBank anytime soon, but like that is something, that's a path I could go, is like I'm building a lot of great relationships with clients that I cover at the bank. And, again, if stars ever aligned, I could always go work for them as, either a controller or a CFO somewhere in their finance department, in their treasury department. And I see that very similar to what I would do in accounting, as I would have, worked in the service space for a while, made some good connections, understood like what I want to do in a career, and then probably go work in an accounting department at, either a client or a similar type business.
No, that makes sense. And I hope that gives some ideas to students wondering like what career paths are there in accounting, what can I do? So I hope that gives them some good ideas. Because back then when I was going into accounting, like I wasn't really thinking that far ahead. And maybe if I knew maybe I would have chosen like, different decisions.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't want to discourage, accounting students from doing this, but like, for example, like I worked for a public accounting firm who has, hundreds and hundreds of clients, right? So like there's so many different, types of clients I could have been touching on a day-to-day basis. That kind of differs from, let's say out of college, I went and worked for, McDonald's, and just worked in McDonald's accounting department. Like, not that I wouldn't recommend that, like that would be excellent experience, but it's a little bit less, what's the right word? It's like a little bit less like opportunity to kind of expand out in different industries, because again, at McDonald's, working directly for their accounting department, like it's probably going to be a very specific experience. And so that's just something I always share with, college students now, where people get like moving on in their careers, like working for, banks who have hundreds and hundreds of clients, working for these, public accounting firms who have so many different clients, is just such a big opportunity base.
To get like a broader experience, more opportunities. No, that completely makes sense. In your professional time in accounting as well as the banking world, how have you seen like technology, as we know, technology is growing every day, every week. How have you seen technology grow in those fields and impact the accounting and the banking world?
Yeah, so funny enough, and it kind of relates back to what I was talking about earlier about, what they should be teaching kids in college. But so funny enough, when I joined the bank, which was almost 6 years ago now, I had an accounting degree. I had a finance MBA. So I was more or less the typical target for, who they would hire as, finance and accounting people.
Yeah.
We actually, I don't say we exclusively, but like we way more look at, computer science people now. We look at, software engineers at the bank, right? So it's like, we definitely look for more of these technical people who know the technical skills. But I would say it's actually a running joke at the bank. And this is not just my bank, specifically. This is actually all banks, all big banks that you could name. Our technology, at least internally, is pretty, I don't say it's old, but it's like once you build a banking system on, and like, again, most banks started many years ago, way back before we were even born, right? So obviously the technology was not very advanced back then, and they built these banking systems internally around, way back then. And it's really, again, anyone who's worked for a big corporation, it's really hard to like change your internal systems, right? Like it'd be easy, it would not be easy for, a bank to say, oh, we're going to get rid of this really old system and just migrate everything over to this new modern thing, right? So yeah, that's kind of the running joke is like, yeah, banks technology, at least internally, is very outdated, which is more or less true. But again, that's every bank. But in terms of like, I guess like what us, the employees, use, I kind of already touched on it. Like Excel has been, I use it daily, multiple hours a day, even in my current role as like a sales professional. I obviously used it more, during my analyst time, but I use that every day. Tableau, which if you're familiar with Tableau, like we briefly learned it in my MBA program, but like once I came to the bank, like we use that every day. We do a lot of data visualizations in there, graphs, charts, stuff like that. So that definitely you can see more progression on, because that's obviously a little bit easier to, modernize and, implement new systems. But in general, I'd say, bank technology is for the most part kind of old.
Nice. Yeah, that's a very good point you mentioned about Tableau as well, because I feel like that's something that students or young professionals can kind of learn and become professional at on their own time too. I feel like that will probably give them a good edge when applying to, let's say, banking jobs or accounting jobs.
Yep.
The next question, I always ask this from my guests, because I feel like it does affect a lot of fields. So I want to get your thoughts on it as we're talking about technology. With the fast growing field of AI, how do you think AI is going to affect accounting, but also the banking world? Because you say, it's a lot of crunching numbers, graphs. How do you think AI is going to affect doing those works?
That's, for what I do specifically, I would say it's hard to say what like AI is going to have an effect on, but I will say it's kind of a similar concept, but it's not directly AI, I would say. But one thing that's big in the banking world now is, I guess, two things. We call it embedded banking, or specifically one of our products is called VAM now, which again, I'm not going to sit here and explain all the little details about what that is, but essentially what it is it's trying to get our clients to not have to like log into our online banking portal as much, right? Like, and that's honestly one thing that's probably the main complaint I hear from my clients every single day is like, oh, we have 7 different banks, and I have to log into all these different banks every day. I have to, manually approve this stuff. I have to manually do that, right? So that's actually like, honestly, what I spend a lot of my days doing is just trying to help clients be more efficient with getting their data, getting their payments out the door, making sure their payables and receivables processes are, very efficient and fast. Less paper is better. In terms of, so I guess I would say that is, it's not directly AI, but it's kind of like, it's the same concept. We're trying to
same area.
take manual tasks out of our client's hand and either put it in our hands or just create a system for them. In terms of AI directly, I would say, and I'm probably not knowledgeable in it enough to give you specifics, but fraud is huge, obviously, especially during COVID. Like we saw during 2020 and even to now, like we just saw such an acceleration of fraud, not just at our bank, at all banks, honestly. I think it was just because, more people were home and had nothing to do. So they, learned some skills they probably shouldn't have learned.
Was it a lot of like businesses or like individuals that you guys saw these like?
I mean, it happens across the board, but businesses are a little bit easier to be compromised, I would say, just in the sense that, again, you and I as consumers, like if something pops up on our bank statement that is, fraudulent or something that looks funky, like you and I are going to notice it because you and I aren't like, flushing out money left and right every day. But, these big businesses who are writing like, 300 checks a day or 400 checks a day, and they have so many different employees who are, approving these bills or like, it's a lot less obvious for them to notice it when there's so many transactions coming in and out on a daily basis. So I would say in general, like, it definitely happens to both consumers and businesses, but businesses, unfortunately, it seems like are getting targeted even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to keep an eye out for my statements.
Yeah.
In your years of experience at KeyBank, now that you've talked about, like fraudulent activities, what's the most common mistake that you see businesses or individuals make when it comes to like managing their finances?
Ooh, that's a good question. Do you mean like in specific to like that leads to fraud, or just like in general, like the big
both,
like
sure, both. I guess
Okay.
I was thinking more in general, like what's the most common mistake you see like individuals or businesses make overall?
Yeah. I don't know if I would call it a mistake per se, but the one thing that, well, definitely one thing is giving one person in your organization too much authority. We do see that a lot where like there's really just one person who can make like all decisions for the company. And again, you obviously want to limit the amount of people who are making big decisions at companies, but it's definitely hard when you only have one person doing it, because, it's harder to, it's only one person's perspective. They get to make all the decisions, right? So, we always try to encourage, our clients to kind of dwindle some of those responsibilities down to like, a level, like if it's the CEO who has all the, authority, like kind of give one or two people below them the same ability. In terms of like the fraud specifically, and this is actually something I work with clients on every day, is you got to get rid of paper-based processes. And I think I already talked about it a little bit, but like I was shocked when I started my current role that like most big sophisticated companies that you can think of, I don't want to say most, but like at least many years ago, it was most, they still like literally handwrite so many checks, right? Like just how like you would, I mean, technically they would print out the check, but like they'd have to manually print it. They'd have to manually stuff the envelope. They have to manually put the stamp on it. Just for like how sophisticated the world is nowadays. Like
that's kind of old.
It's so old, and that's how fraud happens, right? Is fraudsters steal checks out of the mail. They can see your account number written on the bottom of the check. So, anything you can do to reduce the amount of paper going out not only, saves your staff time internally, but it obviously like lessens that risk of fraud because, it's less sensitive information just kind of floating out in the USPS mail, which obviously you don't want. So
that makes sense. And my next question, honestly, you might have the same answer you just gave for my next question. So I'll still ask it in case you have a different answer. But if you had the power to change one thing about the accounting or the finance world and industry, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say, anything to, that's where I feel I don't say the worst, but like whenever I talk to clients, so this is actually a good delineation to make too. So when I have my relationship with my clients, I usually have two separate relationships. I usually have one with a decision maker who's going to be like the CFO or the CEO. They're the ones obviously making decisions. But then I also have a secondary relationship with like the accountants at the client, right? Who are the doers. They're the ones who are actually, issuing payments every day. They're the ones reconciling their bank statements every day. So like they're more the doers. So, and again, that's like one of the most main complaints I get from when I talk to the doers is they're like, oh, I spend so much time trying to reconcile these bank accounts every day. And it's so manual. And, I'm always just, manually having to look at so many different computer screens, so many different bank statements. So like anything that, I can do in my power, in my role, and then also just giving them advice, like any way that they can reduce the time it takes to do these processes is going to save, again, them a ton of time. It's going to save them a lot of headaches. It's going to make the doers a lot more happy with their roles than, having to do all these manual tasks.
Less errors.
Yeah. So I would say that specifically for sure is just like getting businesses to get rid of manual tasks. And how I know it's a lot easier said than done. I would say like it's obviously a lot harder to actually do that, but that is probably the one thing I always encourage clients to do is find more efficient ways to do things.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Working at a bank, what is your take on cryptocurrency and where do you think cryptocurrency will go?
So funny enough, we don't really touch cryptocurrency. Okay. I don't want to say we don't, like I in my role, like that's never even a topic. Like we don't really have clients asking about it. We don't have, my internal leadership is not talking about cryptocurrency. I think crypto is actually a lot more relevant in the accounting space, because I do know when I was working in accounting, like that was a big hot topic. It was kind of new back then when I was working for my public accounting firm. Yeah. And no one really knew, the government didn't really know how to treat it either, because people were just making hand over fist money on this, crypto stuff. And, obviously the government wants to make their tax revenue, so they had to find a way to tax it properly. So honestly, I don't, that's not a topic that I get from my client. I've never actually had a client bring up the topic of crypto before. I don't want to say it's not relevant at the bank, but I would say in general, it's more for, I feel like I more hear the crypto space talked about when it comes to like extremely wealthy people who have a lot of money to, should I be investing in crypto if I have extra money? Yes or no? I'm not going to sit here and answer that. I'm not I can't give good advice on that. But for me, honestly, it just is not relevant in my space. Do you
think personally, like, do you think it could become where it will be used as like one of the main currencies alongside dollar, or no? You think dollar's like too powerful?
I don't. Just because like I feel like 6 or 7 years ago, and you might remember this, like people were saying exactly what you just said. They're like, oh yeah, like this is the future, like this is going to happen. But like, I don't think I've seen it become any more relevant to me in the last it just seems like it's still the same thing.
Same
and I'm sure there's other things we could think of that, like, again, people are like, oh, this is going to be the next like thing, but it just never was. So
next question is my last question before we kind of wrap around back to your podcast. Okay. So I want to ask what advice you have for students who want to kind of pivot their career, want to align themselves through undergrad to kind of go the corporate banking world. What's your best advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I know it sounds, cliche, and it's probably the same advice I get from a lot of people, but you have to make connections. Again, another kind of running joke in the bank is like, it's like, oh, if you got hired at the bank, like you must have known somebody, right? Which is certainly not totally true. Like I didn't know a single person at KeyBank when I was hired. I just grinded my way through the process. Yeah. But all that to say, like, reach out to, if you know professionals in the industry you want to go into, like reach out. Like people are always more than willing to, I do that at least once a month. I'll have, an RIT student reach out to me who's in finance or accounting and say, hey, I saw you work for a bank. Like, do you mind just, chatting for 30 minutes about what you're doing. I saw a couple of roles that I might want to apply for. So do stuff like that. Find, people who went to the same school you went to, who were, part of the same fraternity you were in or played on the same sports team you were in. Find ways to make connections that way. And then in terms of like the skills for these types of students coming out, and I think I touched about it earlier, obviously learn all those fancy softwares and all the stuff they teach you in school, but I can't stress enough how important it is to learn the soft skills, because funny enough, someone, I forgot who it was, but someone gave me like the best advice ever. It was just like a year ago. I forgot who it was, but someone internally just mentioned, and I was like, wow, that's so true. But basically what she said was, let's say like tomorrow I decided to just up and, resign my position and leave the bank, right? People who I work with are not going to remember, for the most part, they're not going to remember like the work I was doing or remember the cool like projects I started or the cool ideas I had. Most people are just going to be like, oh yeah, Nate was a cool guy, or yeah, he was really a pleasure to work with, or he wasn't, right?
Or the opposite.
Yeah. So it's like, at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's great to like be dynamic, know all these different skills and whatever, but like being able to make human connections with your coworkers and just people in general, like that is what people will remember about you. And that's how, again, you will, advance in your career is people, when companies are talking about promotions, they're obviously going to look externally, but they 9 times out of 10, I should say like 99 times out of 100 probably, they would much prefer to promote someone internally. So they're just going to think like, all right, who do I know that, works really hard and I like the work they do, and they're going to tap you on the shoulder. So make sure you pay attention in school and get good grades, but more importantly, make sure you know how to have those soft skills and build those connections.
That's great advice. And I think like you said, like people want to work with other people who are pleasant to work with. Even if somebody is a hard worker, but they just have a really bad attitude or they're hard to get along with, they're not going to want to work with them. They're not going to refer them. They're not going to have anything nice to say to them. So
the shocking thing is just how competitive, I would say, like, especially entry level, jobs have become, I would say, at least again, from my perspective at the bank. Like I said, I interview a lot of prospective interns and prospective analysts, and like, I read all these resumes and they're all, from very high class schools like Carnegie Mellon, University of Michigan, University of Indiana, Ohio State, like all these like very prestigious business schools. They all have 3.8 GPAs, 3.9 GPAs, right? Which again, it's all great, but like, there's definitely, even if you think you're the smartest and the most coding languages and all that stuff, like I also have 99 other resumes that have the same qualifications. So it's more about, again, those soft skills and, why are you why are you coming to our company to interview with us, right? So it's more about that kind of stuff.
That's sort of differentiating factors.
Exactly.
So now kind of wrapping back my last few questions regarding your podcast before we wrap up the episode. Again, Bill's Tailgate Happy Hour. Who would be your dream guest if you could bring on anybody on your podcast? Who would be a dream guest and why?
I think everyone could guess that. Josh Allen, of course. Okay. And I actually said that. I remember when I first was coming up with the idea for it. I kind of obviously I jokingly said I don't think Josh Allen's going to come on my podcast, but I was like, wouldn't it be sick like if I got Josh Allen to come on? Because I think I saw him on I don't know, for those of you guys who watch sports and media, Kyle Brandt. He's like one of the he's on the NFL Network. They have a daily show every morning. It's called Good Morning Football. And he's like one of the main hosts. But he, like in the off season, he has this podcast he does. It's called, I think it's called like Kyle Brandt's Basement, where he literally just like interviews players in the off season and just, asks how they're doing, what they're up to, whatever. And and he interviewed Josh Allen. And I was like, man, that's pretty cool. Like he just, Josh Allen was just chilling in his basement, like looked like he was playing video games or something. And I was like, it'd be cool just to like, obviously it'd be cool to interview him from like a football perspective and hear whatever, but like it would just be cool to interview some of these guys just as like people, because that's one thing even like I catch myself like doing sometimes is like athletes are obviously so just put on a pedestal and idolized, which again I do too. I think Josh Allen's awesome, but like at the end of the day, like they're just humans too, like you and I. So it's like it'd be cool just to get to interview someone like him or really anyone on the Bills. I would love to do, but he's definitely the one that's the ultimate goal.
Well, nothing's impossible, and you never know. You never know. He might
Josh,
see this
if
segment
you're listening
here.
out there, Josh.
Yeah, he might see this segment right here and be
Yeah.
like, you know what? Well, let me go on his podcast. I get an interview.
We'll see.
You never know. The next question is more of a hypothetical type question. Let's say you are the head of accounting or head of finance for the Bills, and they want you to make a change to save some money for the team.
Oh boy.
And you have to either fire or trade a player.
Ooh, wow, that's a tough question. If I had to fire or trade a player.
Right. I was gonna say at first if you had to fire one of the players.
Yeah.
But let's say if you could even trade one of the players, who would it be?
So again, for those of you who have been listening to my podcast, my 5 episodes I've done so far, one of the main guys I've talked about a lot has been Tyler Bass, their kicker. So I don't have the numbers in front of me. I forget what his contract is, but unfortunately it's like a pretty like tough contract to get out of. And I feel terrible for the guy because I mean, his first few years in the league with the Bills, he was clutch. Like he just would hit every kick. Like no one really was worried about, him. And then, we signed him to an extension and, he obviously got this great contract. He's been struggling pretty bad since kind of the end of last year. Again, for those of you, I hate to bring up the memory, but for those of you who watched the Bills Chiefs playoff game last year, he missed that critical kick at the end. But again, I'm not totally blaming him. There was a lot of things that went wrong in that game, but he missed that big kick. And then we've even seen the start of this year. He's been like kind of just on or off. Like sometimes he hits like 4 of 4 field goals in a game, but then he also misses some random, 40-yard field goals or some random 35-yard field goals. So I feel bad for him. Like being a kicker is like I've never been a kicker, but like it's such a mental position, I would have to imagine, like, because it's just so like when you miss a kick, like it's just right in front of everyone's face to see it. So he's one guy I know, like the Bills have been trying to think of other options if they needed to go down that road, but unfortunately, like his contract is just so tough right now to get rid of. So that's probably what I'm most interested in for them now is like seeing what they can do with that contract. But who knows? I still love you, T-Bass. Don't worry.
Last question. What's the score prediction for today's game? So for when this episode goes live, will probably be a week after Bills are playing the Jets. But Bills are playing the Jets today at Met Stadium, MetLife. So what's your prediction for the score today? And do you think Josh Allen will score a touchdown?
Bills by a billion, 52-0 tonight.
Oof, okay.
Josh Allen will have 4 touchdowns. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding about the score. It's not gonna be 52-0. I do feel really good about the game tonight because Jets, for those of you watching the news, Jets just are in shambles right now. They're 2-3, I think their record, or 2-3. Yeah, that's right. They're 2-3. They just fired their head coach. Aaron Rodgers is not panning out exactly what I think they envision this team to be. They have so many weapons on that team, so they're in a really tough spot. The Bills are coming off 2 losses in a row, which Bills almost never lose multiple games in a row. I was shocked that they lost the last 2. So I do expect them to finally bounce back tonight. I do think it'll be a good margin. I think they'll win. I'll go for a score prediction. I'll go 31-21 is what I'm going to go with. Bills are going to win.
All right. And Josh
so mark
Allen
that
scoring a touchdown?
At least one. He's going to go for between on the ground and through the air. He'll have 3 is going to be my prediction.
Right. So you heard it here. Bills 31, Jets 21. So we'll see.
You got it.
And so that wraps up the episode today, guys. Don't forget to go check out his podcast, Bills Tailgate Happy Hour. And on Instagram, the username is Bills Tailgate HH for Happy Hour. Nate, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to be tuning into your episode next week, and we'll see if your prediction was right. And hopefully we'll have you back on the episode soon. Not to interrupt your exit, but I will say at the beginning of the season, I picked every single game for the Bills, like whether it was going to be a win or a loss. And so far, I am 5 for 5. I've picked all 5 games correct so far. And so you've probably picked this one to be a winner. I did. So, there we go. Go Bills. Yep. Go Bills.